In the 1854 book Walden, Life in the Woods, author Henry David Thoreau coined the term brain rot to describe what he saw as poor intellectual standards across America at the time. More specifically, he felt that our collective sense of curiosity was being suppressed, as those around him were rejecting nuanced, complex ways of thinking in favor of simply consuming other people's thoughts and opinions secondhand. While he was wary of the idea of an actual societal decline, where younger generations were becoming more brain-rotted than the previous ones, I'm sure he would change his mind if someone were to show him what the term would be used to describe 170 years later.
Oh, I love gum. Gum. Stop chewing gum. Nothing good comes from chewing gum, Johnny. Just sticky bubbles and tooth decay.
Alright, in fairness, that clip was edited, but I swear it's not that far off from the actual viewing experience. For those out of the loop, Johnny Test was a popular children's show that aired almost non-stop on Cartoon Network back during the late 2000s and early 2010s, and boy do people have strong feelings on this one. Seriously, look anywhere online and it will become clear that this show's reputation is dog water, with many calling it Gen Z brain rot due to its obnoxious pacing, loud sound design, cheap flash animation, repetitive plots, lazy writing, excessive toilet humor. Really, it'd be quicker just to list what it actually got right. Despite all of the hate, however, Johnny Test was wildly successful, airing for 6 seasons during its original run, plus a 2-season revival series on Netflix just a few years ago. It's also maintained a steady presence online over the years, with its horrible quality being just obnoxious enough to loop back around as perfect fodder for ironic memes and out-of-context clips to go viral on social media.
Why did you resist a police officer?
Why are you police officers?
I blew up Malaysia.
Johnny Test wasn't the only show of its time to be cheaply made and poorly written, but it is perhaps the most popular and widely known of its kind. Even today, the franchise is largely recognizable despite having been off the air for over a decade, which got me thinking, is Johnny Test really as bad as people make it out to be? Surely it had to have done something right at some point to achieve this level of cultural osmosis. So where did this boy with flaming hair and a turbocharged backpack come from? How has he maintained such a high level of relevancy throughout the decades? And why the hell did Cartoon Network air this literally every second they could? All of these questions and more will be answered as we revisit Johnny Test. God, I need a better hobby. Long before it dominated Cartoon Network's daily schedule, Johnny Test actually started out on an entirely different channel. Created by Scott Fellows during the late 90s, it spent years being pitched around to different networks before it would eventually be picked up by Warner Brothers, debuting on the Kids WB Saturday morning cartoon block in 2005. Scott was a lead writer during the golden age of the Fairly Odd Parents, and also the creator of shows like Ned's Declassified School Survival Guide and Big Time Rush, all of which are pretty well received even today. So you might wonder what went so wrong with Johnny Test to where it turned out as brain rot incarnate. Well, there were plenty of production issues behind the scenes, but at least starting out, things actually went pretty smoothly for the show's first season. In fact, I would actually go as far as to say that the first season of Johnny Test was, well, good. Okay, look. Johnny Test was never the kind of show that was gonna set the world on fire, but compared to the reputation that it has online today, the first season was honestly pretty solid. Like, we're talking an above average children's cartoon for the mid-2000s, even above many of Cartoon Network's own offerings at the time. The premise is simple. Johnny Test is a carefree 11-year-old boy with 2 genius twin sisters named Susan and Mary, who can invent, well, literally anything. This includes their genetically modified talking pet dog Dookie, yes, Dookie, who essentially acts as the voice of reason in most situations. From there, the setup is about what you'd expect. Johnny faces a typical childhood problem, he goes to Susan and Mary's lab for an easy solution, things go haywire, and everyone learns a valuable lesson in the end. Boom. Throw in an eccentric cast of memorable side characters, and then rinse and repeat for 6 seasons. However, pretty much right off the bat, Johnny Test was catching strays from critics, as even though the first season was devoid of most of the issues people normally have with this show, there was one aspect that was hard to ignore. Johnny Test was a Dexter's Lab ripoff. Now, I'd actually argue against this, but on paper, it makes sense why people feel this way. Dexter's Lab is about a red-headed genius boy with a lab in his home, whose younger blonde-haired sister is always getting in the way of his experiments. Johnny Test is about 2 red-headed genius girls with a lab in their home, whose younger blonde-haired brother is always getting in the way of their experiments. The comparisons practically write themselves. In execution, however, the show doesn't really feel like Dexter's Lab at all. It's tonally much closer to something like The Fairly Odd Parents, which makes sense given Scott Fellowes' involvement with both programs. It also helps that the main character isn't the scientist here, further making it stand out a bit. It's hardly any more of a Dexter's Lab ripoff than Jimmy Neutron, another 2000s cartoon about a boy genius with a lab. As I alluded to a minute ago, Johnny Test Season 1 is more or less a completely different beast from what the show would become later on. The animation, while a bit basic, was hand-drawn frame by frame with a fairly expressive art style that feels really nostalgic to look back on. The pacing was a lot calmer too, with way less sound effects, more laid-back voice acting, and plenty of room to breathe in between scenes and bits of dialogue. The characters were also very well defined back in this era of the show, and honestly quite likable too. Johnny came off as a genuinely cool and collected character, while still filling the role of a misunderstood underdog. Sure, he could be careless and reckless, but in a very chill and relatable kind of way. His dynamics with the rest of the family all felt very balanced and realistic too. Everybody just bounces off of each other really nicely here. He and his sisters will blackmail and pull pranks on each other, but they still have a believable sibling bond front and center. Dookie is basically Johnny's sidekick, but he's also the voice of reason in every episode, trying to steer him on the right path. I always appreciated the twist with his parents too, where the dad is a stay-at-home clean freak while the mom goes off to work at a corporate office job. They were kind of forgettable otherwise, but served to ground these characters in reality by acting as a source of plot tension in many stories. While it's no Avatar: The Last Airbender or anything, Johnny Test Season 1 is a genuinely enjoyable kids cartoon that I actually think holds up decently well. I still found myself getting invested as I revisited these old episodes. The plots were consistently creative, the characters were likable, the humor felt natural, and the animation had that early 2000s charm to it. Had the series only gotten better from here, I honestly think it would be one of the more well-regarded cartoons from that era. But unfortunately, that wasn't the case. Johnny Test Season 1 was the show at its very best. Shortly after the first season finished airing, Time Warner would merge the WB with their failed channel UPN, creating the CW as a sort of bastard love child between the two. All of these letters are irrelevant, but what matters is that Johnny Test was caught in the crossfire and suffered intense budget cuts as a result. To keep the show alive, production moved out of the United States and over to our neighbors up north, where it would become a fully Canadian cartoon produced by Teletoon on the cheap. Everybody except Scott Fellowes and the original voice cast were completely turned over, meaning that every single writer and artist involved with the first season, many of whom were industry veterans from Nickelodeon, Cartoon Network, and Disney Channel, were now completely out of the picture. What could possibly go wrong? Johnny Test Seasons 2 and 3 are essentially where all of the problems people associate with this show really come into play. The first thing you'll notice before anything else is the new theme song, which infamously rips off Green Day's American Idiot almost beat for beat.
You got a head of fiery hair and a turbocharged backpack. Don't wanna be an American idiot.
Combined with the Dexter's Lab allegations, this served as yet another reason for people to view Johnny Test as an uninspired plagiarism fest. Next, there's the heavily downgraded animation quality, which went from being hand-drawn frame by frame to being cheaply puppet-rigged in Adobe Flash. The characters all became a lot more stiff and less expressive as a result, making the show much less visually interesting to look at. You'll also notice that the pacing is a bit quicker than before as well, with those more subtle, quieter moments found across Season 1 being essentially phased out in favor of making sure that something is always happening on screen. The voice direction got louder, the sound effects became more frequent, and overall the show just became a lot less watchable. I'd still say that these episodes are mostly fine, but I rarely found myself getting invested while watching them compared to the first season. They were simply bare minimum mediocre. I could get through them, but I'd often be checking how much time was left to go. Season 3 originally marked the end of the series, with the double-length final episode seeing Johnny and Dookie's frequently used superhero personas going up against a team-up of all of the various villains they had encountered up to this point. After production wrapped up, the show entered hiatus, and had it ended here, I think it would have gone down in history as a fairly forgettable Saturday morning cartoon, only resurfacing in those childhood shows you forgot about TikTok compilations. That I am above watching, by the way. Of course, that wasn't what happened. Enter Cartoon Network circa 2008. President Jim Samples had recently stepped down after the infamous Boston Moonanite scandal, a marketing tragedy where light brights of characters from the Adult Swim program Aqua Teen Hunger Force were placed around the city to promote the show's upcoming movie. Unfortunately, in a post-9/11 America, these were mistaken for bombs and a potential terrorist threat, and got blown way out of proportion, making national headlines all around the country and discussed ad nauseum on cable news networks. After Samples' departure, President Stuart Snyder would take his place and enact sweeping changes across the network. Most people associate Snyder with Cartoon Network's sudden fixation on live-action reality show content, specifically the failed CN Reel block that lasted less than a year before it began bleeding the company money. What's often forgotten, however, is the channel's sudden reliance on Canadian imports. New Cartoon Network originals became scarce around the end of the decade, and their back catalog from the 90s and early 2000s were in the process of being phased out completely. In their place came a flood of low-effort flash animated cartoons from the Canadian studio Teletoon, which were much cheaper to air and quickly began flooding their schedule as a result. These included shows like Total Drama Island, 16, and George of the Jungle, but the breakout star from this slew of Canadian imports very quickly became Johnny Test. Almost overnight, the flaming-headed boy became the network's SpongeBob equivalent, taking up a majority of the airtime compared to any other program on the schedule. This was when I personally discovered the show, as did most of my childhood friends at the time. It was like I just woke up one day and Johnny Test was everywhere. Everyone suddenly knew what it was and were talking about their favorite episodes like it had always existed. I actually really enjoyed the series back then and at one point considered it my favorite show, although looking back, it was mostly just the season 1 episodes drawing me in, while the season 2 and 3 ones were just passable enough to where they didn't damper my overall positive perception of the series. Of course, that positive perception would not last very long. In response to these high ratings, Cartoon Network would partner with Teletoon in 2009 to produce 3 more exclusive seasons for them. And this, my friends, is where the quality truly begins to go off the rails. The back half of Johnny Test is genuinely unwatchable, and I don't say that lightly. The season 2 and 3 episodes I revisited were a bit rough to get through, sure, but I could finish them. With anything I tried to watch in the back half, however, I often found myself unable to make it more than a few minutes in without exhaustingly clicking off most of the time. What makes it so bad, you ask? Well, you may want to take a seat. First of all, the pacing at this point in the show is completely off the charts. It's nearly impossible to follow along with anything going on in the plot because every scene is moving by at 1,000,000 miles an hour, and the characters deliver every single line by yelling at each other. Then there's the plots themselves, which by this point had become incredibly nonsensical and repetitive. The most noteworthy example of this was their sudden over-reliance on wacky race episodes. You know, like the Hanna-Barbera cartoon, but with Johnny Test characters plugged in. These episodes were extremely lazy and boring to watch, and they didn't just do it once or twice. Oh, no. No, there's a solid dozen or so episodes throughout the last 3 seasons, all recycling this same half-assed kart racing plot over and over and over again. Even as a kid, I'd find myself changing the channel to literally anything else during one of these. Even Disney Channel Shake It Up, that's how desperate I was. But even the non-racing episodes at this point in the show were a slog to get through. The characters are all unlikable and loud, there's a ton of gross out humor, and the stories just flat out aren't interesting. There's never a hook or a sense of urgency like there was in season 1. It's just some of the most generic, get something on the air this week plots you could possibly think of. Then there's the greatest sin of these seasons, the sound effects. Yes, it's finally time to talk about the whip crack.
Recording the voice of Johnny is a huge part. There's also writing the script, animation, music. There's a lot that goes into creating it. But there's one thing that really makes the show.
Okay, that is enough!
I can't imagine the show without that.
If our entire cultural understanding of Johnny Test could be boiled down into one distilled essence, it would be the whip crack sound effect. Starting with the show's 2nd and 3rd seasons, the whip crack was introduced as one of many sound effects bombarding the audience throughout an episode of Johnny Test. And to the average viewer, it may not even have been that noteworthy. However, starting with this back half of the show, the whip crack would begin to be spammed literally every time a character makes any movement on screen. This was most likely done to disguise the now even cheaper animation quality, but if anything, it just drew more attention to it. Nowadays, this whip crack sound is the first thing to come to mind for most people when Johnny Test is brought up, to the point where it's become a meme in and of itself. According to some estimates, a late-stage Johnny Test episode contains about 1 whip crack for every 3 seconds of footage. And if you don't believe me, just watch this random unedited clip from a season 6 episode.
Whatever it is, I didn't do it.
Johnny, quit leaving your toys out!
Johnny, quit taking tiny bites out of my cheese!
Johnny, quit chewing the wires for our inventions!
I didn't do anything. I didn't leave toys out, I didn't bite cheese, and I haven't chewed invention wires since Dookie dared me.
With all of that said, it doesn't just stop at the whip cracks. The sound design of late-stage Johnny Test is genuinely headache-inducing, as there are constant music cues and wacky sound effects blaring at all times. It often gets to the point where they start to overlap each other, and combined with the constant yelling, breakneck pacing, and cheap animation, it becomes impossible to actually feel engaged with anything happening in an episode. There's just no other way to describe it other than brain rot. And keep in mind, Cartoon Network was spamming this show every single day. It's no wonder that this show became so popular to hate online. But as they say, there's no such thing as bad publicity. Johnny Test would air its final episode on Christmas Day 2014. Truly one of Santa's greatest gifts. While its cancellation was swift and unnoticed, the series would never truly leave the public consciousness. The hatred would continue to linger around online for years to come, and it would only grow stronger as several reboots were attempted. The first of these came in 2020, when a series of extremely low-quality web shorts riled the internet back up and got everyone excited to beat on their favorite fiery-headed whipping boy some more. These were so poor in quality that they were almost immediately deleted, with most of them now being lost media. Truly the worst thing that happened that year. The reboot you're probably all more familiar with, though, was the one on Netflix from just a few years ago. From the looks of it, this one actually seems to be a bit better than the original show, at least in the animation department. Plus, no whip cracks. Look at that. W or L, let me know in the comments. The general reaction to this reboot was mostly meh, but it did put Johnny Test back at the forefront of the public's ire. One couldn't help but ask why Johnny Test was returning over so many more deserving canceled shows. Since then, the series has lived on through out-of-context internet memes and whip crack edits, with many people making drinking games out of the absurd amount featured in the later episodes. Now divorced from all context, the internet has developed a sort of strange, ironic appreciation for Johnny Test. After all, it is really funny to think about how bad the quality is. Plus, it's a lot less grating re-experiencing the show through funny edits and memes about Bling Bling Boy. Johnny Test is a prime example of a show that's so bad it's good. And if there's one thing the internet loves, it's ironic obsession with poorly made brain rot content. All of this is to say that Johnny Test is absolute cinema. Thanks for watching. I've been GregCubed, and I'll see you next time.